Over the last year, I've gotten back into wrestling. I took a couple of years off after the closure of Ring of Honor in 2021, and just nothing really interested me for over the course of 2 years. But when I got back into wrestling, I got back into it through the WWE, and I watch it with my partner, and we watch every show, and it's been very enjoyable. There are problems, of course, that I have with it. There's no company that I've ever watched that I just walk away thinking, you know what, I'm just going to take it as it comes. But I think that WWE is the closest that I do that with. Because I know that I can't be upset about the WWE and what they do, because that's just going to drive you crazy. I was into the WWE in the late 2000s. I was into the WWE very shortly in the early 2010s. And especially in the early 2010s, I spent a couple months watching at the beginning of 2013 when CM Punk was champion and The Rock coming back. And I just spent that 3 months furious. So the idea of being invested in watching the WWE and kicking my feet and screaming that they aren't doing things the way that I, a dork, would seems like a waste of time and energy. That's not to say that I don't think that there are problems with the way that WWE books, that there aren't problems with the way they approach things, that there aren't problems with the way they format shows, that they are largely unambitious as a wrestling company. But I've come to a tacit appreciation for what it is that they offer. They do things well, and the things that they do well are what I try to focus on, and the things they don't do well, I understand them, and I don't let it get me down. One of the things that I largely have a problem with when it comes to the WWE and their booking over the last year, and it's been their booking problem that has come under Triple H, is that Triple H, for the most part, is a very safe booker. And what that means is Triple H does not like his champions wrestling very frequently. He does not like to deviate from plans that he makes, which has stretched out rivalries for too long. He is very fond of very stock programs. The example that can fill all of these is the Rhea Ripley versus Liv Morgan story, which started before SummerSlam in 2024 and extended from July, August into January, and has had little bits here and there pop up since then, but that's almost 6 months of a story that does not need that much time, and there just wasn't a lot of movement on it because they don't want Rhea wrestling too frequently. They don't want Liv Morgan wrestling too frequently because they don't want them to get injured and have to deviate from plans. So in that way, Triple H is a very safe booker. You can see that in the way that he books his champions to wrestle. Someone like Braun Breaker with the Intercontinental Championship does not wrestle very frequently on TV. Gunther, as the World Heavyweight Champion, does not wrestle very frequently on TV. Cody doesn't wrestle frequently on TV. They're mostly just consigned to the PLE events, and even there, you're not going to see very many title changes outside of the quote-unquote Big Four events. And it's a criticism that you can lobby on him, that he is very safe and very unambitious. And I would agree with that. I think that what it stems from is he is trying to establish some level of expectation of normalcy. The WWE, for the entirety of its run on television, like the Monday Night Raw era, was held under Vince McMahon, and especially over the late 2000s into the 2010s, the Vince McMahon booking style was extremely erratic as he mentally declined, and he just changed everything on a whim, and everything was very scattershot, and that came to be what you expected. It was the worst booked wrestling company that could exist, but they were also the most successful, so it warped the way a lot of people view wrestling and view booking. It fundamentally changed how wrestling had to be produced, because people's expectations became so warped and twisted by the way that the WWE, the flagship promotion in the sport, was run. So I think Triple H plays a lot of things safe because he kind of has to. There are a lot of egos at play. There are a lot of moving parts, but also he has to combat the expectations of a very strange audience that comes into wrestling. There's undoubtedly a newer audience that weren't there for the entire 2010s, but they have expectations that are built upon what was being done during the pandemic era with the Bloodline and things like that. Then there are people who come in from the late 2000s into the 2010s, and they have expectations. And everyone is expecting things. So I think that Triple H, over the course of the last couple of years, very much books safe. He very much books quiet. He doesn't want to rock the boat. He needs to kind of right the ship and rewrite people's expectations. And the where that kind of can end up struggling is when people are expecting something and what they consider to be normal. Well, how does this lead into the Royal Rumble? Well, this Royal Rumble was very notable for being built up to as, the most story-driven Rumble. It's the most stacked Rumble of all time. You had 5 or 6 people have these deep, complex relationships going into the Rumble that had these intense motivations to want to play it out. Drew McIntyre only went in so that Roman Reigns couldn't win. Seth Rollins, he did everything that he could to make sure that CM Punk didn't win so that CM Punk couldn't main event WrestleMania. CM Punk wanted to win it so that he could main event WrestleMania. John Cena wanted to win so that he could go to WrestleMania, guarantee a spot, guarantee a title shot to win the 17th World Championship that would break Ric Flair's record. And you have a bunch of people going down the list in the men's Royal Rumble. So a lot of people expected John Cena to win. A lot of people expected CM Punk to win. And then there were ancillary picks like, if Seth Rollins wins, then maybe CM Punk beats Gunther. And then you have CM Punk, Seth Rollins for the World Heavyweight Championship. Something like that. Everyone kind of got married to these ideas of who is going to win the Royal Rumble. And because it had been months of believing that, these things became assumed and they became layups. These are your big wrestlers. They are going to win at the Royal Rumble to guarantee them a spot at WrestleMania. That's how these things tend to work. And it's been that way since The Rock versus John Cena, when the WrestleMania became kind of a spot show where, you have the way that the company works for 9 months out of the year, but from January to April, that's when your big stars come back. That's when The Rock, Brock Lesnar, John Cena show up, and they have to be shoehorned into the show, and they have to be shoehorned in to these big matches so that they can be there. That was the expectation that was going in. So if you have that expectation, well, John Cena's going to come back, CM Punk is going to get a big spot. You have to book around these ideas. That was what was expected. That was what was expected to be safe, because that's how WrestleMania has been booked. So you have this huge Royal Rumble, this huge build-up, segments on Raw and SmackDown, promos back and forth. It seems like a layup. There are a bunch of people who can win, and all of them are getting a lot of time, and they have their motivations. And then Triple H, safest booker in the world, throws what is perceived to be a massive curveball. He has Jey Uso win the Royal Rumble. And it was immediately divisive, because Jey Uso is someone who has garnered a lot of praise and a lot of disdain because of his presence and because of his ability. He is such an interesting wrestler. In fact, when I came back to watching the WWE, it took me 2-3 weeks of watching to want to make this epic video using Jey Uso as a lens with which to talk about wrestling culture. And I ended up not making that video because enough time passed of me not working on it that it just seemed divorced from my mindset. So that's always been in my brain, is that Jey Uso is a very interesting lens with which to observe how people talk about and view wrestling. Jey Uso wins the Royal Rumble and people kind of melt down because he is perceived to be a worse wrestler than the other options. His story is worse than the other options. People got married to their booking options, believing that those booking options are inherently better. And there are a lot of different ways that people have come up with to say that they don't like this Jey Uso decision. I'm not going to string this along and make it confusing. I love the decision, but I am a Jey Uso fan. I think Jey Uso not only is Jey Uso great, I think the Jey Uso's story is great, but the way that I view wrestling and the way that I came to view wrestling has shifted, and it's not an acceptance of mediocrity, which some people might peg it as, but it's an appreciation of what wrestling is. And I'll talk about that shortly. But first, I want to talk about why it is that Jey Uso's Rumble win is divisive. And hopefully you can understand where I come from when I think of why I like this Jey Uso decision. So there are reasons why the Jey Uso win has been deemed bad by people. Specifically, it's that Jey Uso is a worse wrestler than other options. And for the purposes of this discussion, we are considering the other options to be John Cena, CM Punk, and Seth Rollins. I don't think Roman Reigns was ever going to win the Royal Rumble. I don't think he was ever considered a real option. He was an outside force. Drew McIntyre was never going to win and be an option. So I'm considering those three. Primarily, it's John Cena and CM Punk, but we'll throw in Seth Rollins because he is tied in with CM Punk. So Jey Uso is a worse wrestler than them, and Jey Uso is not only a worse wrestler, but he is producing a worse matchup than those guys would. Cena versus Gunther or Cody, Punk versus Gunther or Cody, Seth Rollins versus CM Punk. These matches are going to be better than what Jey Uso would produce with Gunther. And for some reason, there are some people who say that Jey Uso would go and face Cody. Doesn't make sense to me, but we'll just say Gunther and Cody for the sake of posterity. Another reason why people said that the Jey Uso win is bad is because a week before the Royal Rumble, he faced Gunther for the World Heavyweight Championship at Saturday night's main event, and he lost. So people are saying this isn't a new matchup. Why would we want to see a 3-month build-up for a match that we just saw? This isn't a fresh matchup. We could have seen a fresh matchup. Why have that match before the Royal Rumble if you're going to book it for WrestleMania? We'll talk about that in a moment, but just know I think that this reason is insane. The last thing is that it throws off the expected events. If you expect normalcy and you understand normalcy to be Cena, Punk, or someone like Rollins, it throws off what is expected, and so people get upset. Let's talk about the Jey Uso being a bad wrestler, because that is the most understandable critique of the decision. The belief that the best wrestlers should get the best spots. And I understand that. I will say that I think that wanting John Cena to get that spot over Jey Uso, I understand it's a legacy thing, but I think that there aren't enough people who talk about, someone like Kevin Owens getting a spot at WrestleMania in a title match, someone like Sami Zayn getting a spot in the title match. People really are selective in what they decide is the best wrestler should get the best spot conversation, but I don't want to strawman an argument. It's about Jey Uso and what people believe to be is a weaker wrestler. Jey Uso being a bad wrestler, thus being a bad choice for the Royal Rumble, is open to interpretation. It depends on what you're looking for. A lot of people bring up with Jey Uso is that He doesn't do a lot of moves. And there are obviously, like, there are two ways you can go with that. Like, people will talk about matches being limited as an artistic decision and say that they are intrinsically more valuable. For example, John Cena and AJ Styles, their title match at the Royal Rumble, they didn't leave the ring. How incredible is it that they didn't leave the ring? So minimalism is sometimes good, sometimes it isn't. Minoru Suzuki versus Hiroshi Tanahashi at King of Pro Wrestling. They never went for... There was never a kick out, so they weren't able to build tension that way. So people use minimalism sparingly. So you could say Jey Uso doesn't do a lot of moves. His matches aren't fun to watch. But if you're defending Jey Uso, you could just as easily say Jey Uso only has 3 moves and people are still invested in his matches. That means he's great. So I don't attribute a lot of value to someone doing a lot of moves. Everyone's appreciation is different. The understanding of Jey Uso being a bad wrestler is open to interpretation. I think that Jey Uso is, you're not going to call on him to have a great match instantly, but I think that Jey Uso has had plenty of really good to great matches over the last year. All of his matches with Gunther have been good. His match with Ilya Dragunov was very good. I think his Backlash match against Damian Priest was good. His match with Braun Breaker was very good. Like, Jey Uso has plenty of good matches. At the end of the day, wrestling is mostly about investment, and if you aren't invested in Jey Uso, he has nothing for you. He is not complex. He's not going to blow your socks off if you go in expecting them to impress you every time, which some people watch wrestling that way, and I understand, but that's not Jey Uso, and that's not a lot of really good wrestlers. So if that's your bar, I understand not liking Jey Uso and thinking that he's not good, but ultimately everyone's bar is different. So the good wrestler, Jey Uso isn't good, so he shouldn't get a good spot, is open to interpretation. But I will say is that if you believe that the Royal Rumble is there to deliver on match quality with its winner, i.e. the best wrestler should get the best spots, I don't know why you want that, because that's never been a prerequisite. The Royal Rumble winner is often picked based on what is either the best story, like with Cody over Punk in 2024, Cena winning in 2008 to go against Randy Orton was the best story. It wouldn't produce the best match because their matches aren't good. It's a story thing. It's story based and what would make the most sense for a match at WrestleMania. It's either story based, what would be the best story, or it's just an easy way to set up a match if you want to build in different ways. Like when Edge won the Royal Rumble and faced Alberto Del Rio, and it's like, okay, or Alberto Del Rio won and faced Edge. It's like, is this some long tenured rivalry? I don't know. Is that a match that really matters? No, but it doesn't really matter. I understand the perspective of wanting the best wrestler to get the best spots, but that's not really what the Royal Rumble is for. So expecting that, it might be a little on you. With regards to Jey Uso wrestling Gunther a week prior, and that makes it bad because why make that match if you were expecting to have Jey Uso win the Rumble? I will agree that Jey Uso wrestling Gunther on next to no notice is sloppy. They kind of had Jey Uso. They had Jey Uso beat Drew McIntyre on the debut on Netflix, so the beginning of January. They had Jey Uso come out and call out Gunther the next week on Raw, and then they had a little promo segment just before Saturday night's main event. So it was like a 2-week build, and then they had their match. I agree that it was sloppy and that you could have done more, but I think that you should have guys be wrestling opposite each other for a while. A lot of people hate the idea of like quote-unquote meaningless tag matches, but I think that they should be the standard. Gunther should be wrestling on every Raw in tag matches. Jey Uso, if he's wrestling Gunther, should wrestle every week on Raw in tag matches. Could be straight 2-on-2, could be 6-man, could be 8-man. I don't care. Those two should be opposite one another constantly. But the idea of the Royal Rumble being given to Jey Uso is stupid because Gunther and Jey Uso wrestled the week before is so strange to me, because it's like the Royal Rumble winner versus the champion of WrestleMania does not need to be a fresh, never before seen match, and it doesn't have to be a match that hasn't been seen in a while. Like, that's never been a prerequisite. Like, it was clumsily handled, but also it's the story. It's like, well, what does it matter if it was a week before or 6 months ago? Like, the expectation is like, it's not a fresh match, but it not being a fresh match is the story. They've had matches over the last year, and Jey Uso has slowly climbed up in notoriety and now is a major winner of an event like the Royal Rumble. So he is much more on Gunther's playing field than he was when he faced him for the Intercontinental Championship and for the King of the Ring. So it's like, yeah, it's not a fresh match, but you needed those matches to tell the story of Jey Uso's profile being built. If you look over the course of the last 25 Royal Rumbles back to 2000, almost none of them are quote-unquote fresh matches. You know, like Batista Triple H is a fresh match. Like, that hadn't been done one-on-one before, and it was a big storyline with Evolution breaking up. Undertaker versus Batista was a fresh match. That's a big... Batista is a big champion, and The Undertaker is facing him at WrestleMania. That's captivating. It's a good match, but if they had had a bunch of matches prior to that, like they did afterwards, it doesn't make it less of a big match. And I don't understand that perspective. History helps the story. First-time pairings in dream match booking, like Cena Cody, Punk Cody, things like that, maybe I'm weird in that I see the value of that stuff less, because I don't really care about dream matches and seeing these two for the sake of seeing these two. History builds a story, and that's valuable to me. So you can not like the Jey Uso and Gunther story. That's fine. You're allowed to like whatever you want. But painting the booking as bad because it happened a week prior is nonsense. It's good booking. It's one of the best booked stories. You just don't like it. Booking is not matchmaking. People make that mistake a little too much. Booking, people have this perception of what booking is. It's not matchmaking, and it's not like business running. It's giving context and reasons to why matches and events happen. That's booking. Matchmaking and these guys will have a good match doesn't inherently matter ever in booking. It's just what you want to watch. And that's fair, but we're not having the same conversation. The last thing is that people got kind of married to someone like Cena winning the Rumble or someone like Punk winning the Rumble. Cena was the big one. So going into the Rumble, I thought Punk was going to win because I didn't see Cena winning. I thought Punk would win because they really started to push that hard in the last couple weeks. But Cena winning always seemed far-fetched to me, if only because I think that him winning 17 at WrestleMania, as well as tying the record for most Rumble wins on his way out, seems so excessive. It seems so unnecessary to me. So I thought Cena was second, Punk was first. And when Punk got eliminated, I was like, okay, Cena wins. But when it was Cena versus Jey Uso, I was like, Cena's got to throw himself out because let Jey Uso win. I didn't expect Jey Uso to win. I was asked beforehand, who are you actually rooting for? And I only wanted to root for people that I thought had a legitimate shot to win. And I didn't have that. So it's like, it's Cena and Punk, and I don't care if either of them win. I don't want either of them to win. So I understand, because wrestling is 99% investment, and so they were invested in that. But a big thing that people have been doing is like, WrestleMania could have been so special. And they posted pictures of like, of The Rock and Roman having a match. The Rock going back and not wrestling Roman is bitch shit. Like, stop booking around The Rock, because he does not care about wrestling. The only reason he was back last year is because movies did bad, and then movies have started doing good. He was in Moana 2, and that made a lot of money. So Rock's back there. They really got married to the idea of Cody versus Orton, and that's like a big match in theory. I don't love Orton, and like that match is like, that doesn't scream like, oh, that's a huge special match for WrestleMania. I don't know why that would be the WrestleMania match. I assume it would be Orton wins the Elimination Chamber, but whatever. It was Punk versus Rollins, which would be good. And then it was always Cena versus Gunther. Cena versus Gunther has been like talked about and penciled in for 6 months on the internet. And I understand why it was, but I've always hated it, because it was such a transparent booking, like fantasy booking decision for Cena to be able to win a match at WrestleMania, because he's not beating Cody. They're not having Cody lose to Cena at WrestleMania to give Cena 17. So it always came off to me as Cena would win the Rumble and pick Gunther only to get Cena 17 and have a match with Gunther. It's like, that's not a match that anybody really wants. They love Cena, and they want Cena to win 17. And that's it. People got married to that idea. And then more recently, CM Punk is like, oh, he's, win the Rumble and go face Cody. And that would be a good match, but those were the two that people got married to. And if you viewed that as like, this is like the easiest layup, this is obvious, and then the WWE goes against it, I understand being opposed to the decision, but having to reverse engineer a reason for why Jey Uso being in that spot is bad, when you could just say, I wanted these guys to win, it comes off as corny to me. But I have no problem saying I think that I would rather this have happened and explain why. But the reasons that people have, like Jey Uso and Gunther just had a match a week before, that's not a real reason for why the decision is not good. It just isn't. Him being a bad wrestler to you is much more understandable as a reason why it's not good. But again, that's open to interpretation. You can appreciate what you appreciate. So those are the reasons why generally people view Jey Uso winning the Rumble as bad. But there are reasons why I, along with others, view Jey Uso winning as good. I want to make it clear that there are people who are defending this decision that mostly are just Bloodline stans. They like when the Bloodline guys win so that they can post like TikTok edits and stuff like that. I'm not one of them. Don't put me in with that. I am going to talk about the Bloodline story very shortly, but don't let me in with that. I'm an observer, and I'm a Jey Uso guy, so that's why I care. People are invested in CM Punk and John Cena. I'm a Jey Uso guy. I'm doing the yeet when he does his entrance when I'm watching in the living room. So if that's like, oh, it's just a Jey Uso fan defending stuff, also understand that I also know a lot about wrestling. I'm not just like some guy. So I have like understanding of wrestling theory, and I can explain my reasoning. So Jey Uso, why is it good that Jey Uso won the Royal Rumble? First is, I think the easiest, is I think that Jey Uso winning is the best booking story available. And I'm going to explain what I mean by the best booking story. But there's also, it's just the most popular wrestler who is getting pushed is good. It's a good thing that popular wrestlers are getting pushed. And a lot of people have an opposition to that because of history and precedent. I think that factors a lot into it. It's a lot of perception. It's a lot of culture. It's going back on how people understand the WWE to work. So what does it mean that Jey Uso versus Gunther is the best booking decision available? What I mean is that when I think of the matchups that were there, Cena Gunther, Cena Cody, Punk Gunther, Punk Cody, Punk Rollins, matches like that, I think of like what the actual story is. What is the context for why these two would be wrestling? What is the history between them? What is the actual story? And try to think of it outside of the box of the internet, where the perception is like you're thinking of it outside of like the kayfabe world they've created. I'll give my example is that a lot of people have penciled in Charlotte Flair, who won the Women's Royal Rumble, to face Tiffany Stratton. They penciled that in 6 months ago because they expected that to happen. There is no real reason that I have seen why Charlotte should choose Tiffany Stratton over picking Rhea Ripley. Because the history between Rhea Ripley and Charlotte has been built not only around having matches at WrestleMania for championships, not only around being 1-1, but built around winning the Royal Rumble. So it would be a big closure moment in the 3 very distinct eras of Rhea Ripley as a champion to go from the NXT champion losing to Charlotte to then rebuking Charlotte as the Royal Rumble winner years and years, I think it's 5 years later. That is a better story within the world of wrestling, whereas against Tiffany Stratton, it would really just be Tiffany Stratton is newer and the Charlotte Rhea match has been played out and that story has theoretically closed. Rhea got her win back and won the title, flipping the situation from when she was in NXT. So within the context of booking, Charlotte versus Rhea 3 at WrestleMania 41 is significantly better. It is a better booked match. It is a better booked story. But there are practical purposes for matchmaking and booking outside of just what would be the best story. And I understand that. Wrestling does not go along with what is the best booking decision ever. There are practical things outside of that. However, when we go back into Jey Uso, the best booking story by far is Jey Uso versus Gunther. They have the history, they have good matches, and this win builds up Jey Uso to be a peer of Gunther's beyond the pale of him almost beating Gunther at Saturday Night's main event a week prior. It shows that any given night he can beat Gunther, he just needs the chance, and this gets him back to the front of the line and puts them on a huge stage, gives Jey Uso all the momentum to win his first world championship as a singles wrestler. That's amazing. That is a great story. There's no question that is a great story. Even if you don't like the story, even if you're not invested in the result of the story, it's a great wrestling story. Unquestionably a great wrestling story. When you look at the other options for what is the best wrestling story, people talk about Cena Gunther. There's no wrestling story there. You could reverse engineer one, like Cena wants to win a championship he's never won before. Okay, well, go wrestle for the NXT championship then. He wants to test himself against the new generation in Gunther. It's like, well, that doesn't move me. Like Gunther could like call him out and Cena wants to shut up this rookie. Okay, you could back your way into justifying it, but the reason why you would make Cena versus Gunther is so that Cena can win and it doesn't end Cody's reign. That's literally it. That is a practical reason why you would make Cena Gunther. That's outside of booking. That's outside of wrestling stories. Punk Gunther, same thing. You could reverse engineer a story. It would really just be that CM Punk could win. Cena versus Cody, I think, is a good pairing. It's the last generation's big face star against the current generation's big face star. But you don't need Cena to win the Royal Rumble for that. You can still have Cena win the Elimination Chamber, and also Cena should lose, because I think that new generation should beat old generation. And that's why people didn't book Cena versus Cody in their mind palace, because they want Cena to win. That's why it was always Cena versus Gunther. People would Punk Cody. I think that is the best option of the available. It is a big match. There's like a slight bit of the real world history with those two crossing paths tangentially in AEW, and they both came back to the WWE and are both on top of the world. Cody did the work of talking about how he was always chasing the example that CM Punk set, and now CM Punk is the one chasing Cody. It's tangential buildup like it was with Cody and AJ Styles. Like that story was bigger than the kayfabe world, and I'm fully accepting of those things. I think those are fine. This was what I thought the match was going to be. I thought it was going to be Punk versus Cody. It's a big match for night 2 of it. Like, this is the headline match that CM Punk wants so badly, and also Punk can lose, and it's fine. It's a big match between two big stars. I think that's fine. Punk versus Rollins was always an outside contender. Like, Punk wins the Rumble and is meandering about who he's going to pick. Rollins gets into a feud with Gunther and ends up beating him. And then you just backdoor your way into CM Punk versus Seth Rollins for the World Heavyweight Championship. You could also flip it. Rollins wins the Rumble to keep Punk away. Punk wins the championship. And then Rollins goes after Punk because Punk found his way into a WrestleMania main event match. Anyways, there are issues I have with this, but this was always an outside contender. And that is a good story. I just think it's a little convoluted, that I never really considered it to be an option. These things, mostly like Cena Gunther, Cena Cody, and Punk Cody, I think these are all weaker stories. It's just people are more invested in Punk and more invested in Cena. Within the context of booking, within the context of their stories and within wrestling, Jey Uso versus Gunther is the best match that they can book by a lot, in my opinion, by so much. But the ancillary reasons why you wouldn't want the match to happen were detailed before. Jey Uso is a worse wrestler than Punk, than Cena, than Rollins, than the other options. So why would I care about Jey Uso going and getting the big moment when the after effects are a worse wrestler is holding a World Heavyweight Championship? And I think that's fine. You don't have to be excited about it, but that's why I think that the decision is good because it is the best booked story. And so rarely in wrestling do wrestling bookers go with what is the logical story. So if you watched the WWE and you watched like the Bloodline story, I talked about this with a friend of mine in like 2022. It's that if there was like a best ending to this, it would be that Jey Uso is the one that ends Roman Reigns' title reign. So when people are talking about Sami Zayn, when people are talking about Cody, it's like those would be good, and I would accept those, and I wouldn't be upset if Jey Uso didn't end it. But there is no question that the way that they have told this story, the story they have told is absolutely that Jey Uso should beat Roman Reigns. And I understand why they wouldn't. They can't do that. And they didn't do that. There are practical, functional reasons why they cannot do that. But the realistic ending should be that Jey Uso wins in the end. But they didn't go with that, and I understand. So when the bookers create this story and then end up going with the best booking choice, I am never, ever, ever going to bash that as a bad decision. Because I think that if you are telling a story, you should see it through to the end, or else don't start telling it. A lot of people in wrestling don't believe in that. They believe that if the story changes, if the fans are putting backlash onto it, you should change what the story is and listen to the fans. Only people aren't really interested in listening to the fans. They want the best choice. Because, I hate to break it to you, but Jey Uso is not only the most popular wrestler on the roster right now, Jey Uso has only gotten more popular over the year. All through the year, people were getting on Jey Uso. It's like, oh, he's a catchphrase guy, like every other wrestler in the goddamn world besides like CM Punk. He only does 4 moves. Who cares? He has bad matches. I disagree, but whatever. And he's only gotten more popular. And it's like, well, he's just an entrance. It's like, okay. People wanted better for Bobby Roode. People wanted better for all the entrance merchants. But then it's Jey Uso. It's like, well, no, the Yeet Man shouldn't get it. Why? And this is where people come up with reasons why they can't be like hypocrites and wrong. And when they start having to explain themselves out of corners, that's when it starts to become clear, like, oh, you just don't want to say that you don't like Jey Uso. So you have to come up with a way to make your perspective not just your opinion, but a fact. Big one that I've seen is talking about LA Knight. LA Knight was just as popular as Jey Uso, debatable, and he didn't get this big push. And I hate this suggestion because it tells me that people in wrestling do not have the ability to parse out what is being pushed well when it doesn't involve a championship. I don't know if people watch LA Knight on SmackDown. He is the most oppressive wrestler on that roster, by far. You could say it's Roman, you could say it's Cody because they don't lose matches, but they aren't there all the time. Very often they don't show up. LA Knight is on every episode of SmackDown. Very often when he wrestles, he gets a microphone before the match or after the match with which to talk shit to an opponent that doesn't ever defend themselves. When he gets into brawls, he always wins them. You go to his booking, he beat AJ Styles at WrestleMania last year. He beat Logan Paul at SummerSlam last year for the US Championship. By the way, Logan Paul beat Randy Orton and Kevin Owens at WrestleMania. And Cody had this big like interference epic, whereas LA Knight beat him clean and won every exchange in the rivalry. He wins every brawl. He never looks weak. He so rarely gets like beat up. This is all not even to mention more specific examples. Like they had over the summer last year and beginning of fall, they had Carmelo Hayes and Andrade have a best of 7 series, essentially for the right to be the number 1 contender for the United States Championship. They were carrying the mid-card on SmackDown for weeks, maybe months, right? And these two are tied 3-3 because you have to in a best of 7. They're tied 3-3, and LA Knight is the special guest referee because of booking, and LA Knight interferes in the match, calls it off, goes to a no contest, cuts a promo talking about, yeah, I'm the greatest, yeah, I'm the best, you two are bums, yeah. And as a punishment, he is booked into a triple threat match. Now, the way that this story should go, if you are booking properly, is LA Knight has to be the center of attention, and because of that, he loses the title. I would have LA Knight not even get pinned, and Andrade or Melo pins the other one, effectively winning the best of 7 series while winning the United States Championship, and LA Knight doesn't get involved in the fall to lose it because he created the situation. That's how that story should go. That if you're constantly interfering and getting involved in matches, you get into a triple threat, you lose. But what happened in the match? LA Knight wins. He may as well have double stacked pinned them because he just won the match, and then there was no best of 7 series finale, and that rivalry was ended. And LA Knight won the rivalry between Carmelo Hayes and Andrade. That's insane. That is an insane protection and over-pushed wrestler, over-represented wrestler. But because he doesn't hold a championship, people's brains just break. This was something I brought up years ago, 2019. I talked about Cody Rhodes. I talked about Cody Rhodes the entire time going into the before going into Dynamite and their show. I talked about how Cody Rhodes was so much more present in the grander scope of AEW than anybody else. The promotional material featured him way more. But people didn't notice that because he wasn't wrestling for the championship, because he wasn't the champion. He had major matches on all of the build-up shows, all of the build-up pay-per-views going into Dynamite. He was the first match on the first Dynamite. He had these singles feuds that were circulated around him, and very quickly people started to turn on him because he was so centralizing. He cut himself off from the championship in a stipulation, and I said before that, he's probably not going to win the championship because he wants to avoid being labeled as Jeff Jarrett. He wants to be a very visible wrestler, but he doesn't want to be the champion, so he could still just be in these big spots. This happened with John Cena when he was the US champion. He got the goodwill of not being the top champion, but he was still having the most matches, the longest segments, winning everything. But because he wasn't the top champion, people said, wow, he's so humble and he's working the mid-card. Triple H, he has these matches at WrestleMania, but he's not in the main event of WrestleMania, and he's having the longest entrances and he's having the longest matches, but he's not in the main event of WrestleMania, so we don't really care. People's brains don't work if it's not a wrestler holding a championship for a long time, because they can't point to a number on a title reign. Like, this person's held the title for this many days and hasn't done this. But if someone's on the show every week, never losing a segment, always being featured, they don't view that as overpushed. LA Knight is one of the most oppressive wrestlers on a WWE roster. People want to talk about like Rhea Ripley. She's overpushed, she's overbooked, she's overrepresented. LA Knight loses fewer segments than Rhea Ripley and is on more shows. And there are more options because it's the men's division and not the women's division. Like, what are we talking about when we're talking about overpushed, overrepresented? LA Knight, yeah, he's not winning the world championship. He came in at a bad time. He got really popular when there was one title being held by Roman Reigns. And sorry that you're not beating Roman Reigns. Good wrestlers didn't even beat Roman Reigns. Comparing LA Knight to Jey Uso when LA Knight has been more pushed than Jey Uso up until right now is so insane, is so dumb. And then when it comes down to it, like, people say, like, you know, he's got an entrance and he sells merchandise. Why? But he's not good, so you shouldn't push him. It's like, I'm sorry, in what world have we turned so quickly and been like, yeah, you know what? The WWE should have treated Rusev better. You know, he got over by himself. Should have treated Zack Ryder better. Should have treated Dolph Ziggler better. Should have treated this guy better. Should have treated this guy better. Because they got popular and the WWE decided, we don't want him. But then someone gets popular and continues to get more popular, and it's just like, no, I don't really want him. I don't think he's good. Like, I don't believe in arguing popularity as a point. I don't care if someone is popular. So I understand why people are objecting to it. I do. But I never looked at New Japan, for example. And I never said, why is Sonata, I never acted confused, why are they pushing Sonata so hard? I understood, I just didn't like it. And I never made that a secret. I never said they should push this guy, he's just as good as Sonata and also gets cheers. I understood why. I just said, made it my opinion, I don't think Sonata is very good. So people who are coming up with reasons why they shouldn't push Jey Uso, they just want to avoid it being an opinion and want to make it a fact. And it's a plague that curses conversations forever. It sucks. I hate it. Just say, I don't like Jey Uso. I'm not invested in his matches. And that's fine. I won't think you're weird. But coming up with weird reasons like they didn't give LA Knight a championship. This guy sells a lot of t-shirts. He's not getting championships. Okay. I thought you wanted them to get championships. And now you just want, if they didn't get it, then this guy shouldn't either. What are we talking about? I'm not going to be upset when the WWE, a company that has been known for ignoring how popular people are because they're not their chosen few, and books so badly that it has irreparably ruined an entire generation and a half of wrestling fans not only decides to go with the best booking story, but decides to go with the best booking story circulated around the most popular wrestler. And it's a popular wrestler that isn't just like an entrance. Jey Uso has been the driving force for 5 years behind the Bloodline story. And people could say that the Bloodline story is exhausting and burnt out, but the reason why it transformed the WWE and completely changed Roman Reigns' entire career is because it was a revolutionary story for wrestling. And the driving force behind that has always been Jey Uso. Roman Reigns is in the big matches. Jey Uso has always been the driving force behind it. People could say, oh, well, Sami Zayn came in and revived it. It was like, that's not a Sami Zayn story. It helped. He was a main fixture. But whenever Sami Zayn did something, it was never about Sami Zayn. It was, look how that makes Jey Uso feel. Sami Zayn gets called an honorary Uso. The camera cuts to Jey and how he feels. When Sami Zayn turns on Roman Reigns at the Royal Rumble, the reaction is cut to Jey's face right now and how conflicted and how upset he is. Even before that, Roman Reigns' first title defense, first story after winning the championship is with Jey Uso, who goes on to cut some of the best promos that have ever been cut in the company. Jey Uso has been the emotional core to the biggest revolution in WWE in over a decade. And I'm supposed to be like, well, he's not good enough in ring. Something that I don't even agree with. Worse people than Jey Uso in ring have been pushed harder than Jey Uso. Jey Uso's gotten one Intercontinental Championship reign that lasted 2 weeks for being the most popular wrestler in the WWE for a year. You are never, ever going to convince me this was a bad choice because you could have gone with John Cena. You're just never going to do it because it's the best booking story for the most popular wrestler in the biggest spot that you can get him. You're never going to convince me it's bad because it's not what you would have booked. And I am not one to defend the WWE booking. They got this one right. And I didn't expect that at all because I shouldn't go into a WWE show ever expecting them to book the most logical, straightforward story. They just don't do it. And I understand not expecting it because nobody does it. But when they do it, I think they should be commended for it. Now, obviously, I'm biased because I am a Jey Uso fan, but going into the Royal Rumble, I didn't expect them to do that. He wasn't even an option. I expected him to be Final Four at most because you gotta have him Final Four. I thought it was gonna be Punk, Cena, Roman, and Jey. Maybe Jey eliminates Roman and then very quickly gets eliminated by Punk or Cena. But no, like when that happened, it's like, okay, we're booking like super well right now. Amazing. You will never convince me with all of the fantasy booking in the world that this is a bad choice. That's really all I have to say. If you don't like the story, I understand. You don't have to like it, but just say that. Stop trying to make it up to be a bad story. It's not a bad story. You're just not invested in it. And wrestling is 99% investment.
I'm a circus superstition, the one the same. I love the Beach Boys and I ride the waves, but my true passion is wrestling, I gotta say. Oh, for she's the one who tells the hard truth about the moves and the stats he's got to prove. He loves Jay White and he's never been wrong. For Scotlandology's got it going.